those that produce a more dreamy, relaxed, more mellow kind of a thing. So it's just a curiosity, and of course it also is mirrored, the same drive is mirrored within their control of language, and you notice that we're all using more and more contractions, which of course is getting us down into the almost texting area, which to a certain extent dumbs you down, because you're planning on, I don't own a cell phone or deal with them anymore because of the interference issues, both with your brain and other computer equipment, so on. But in any event, just the mere fact that you have text typing ahead is going to tend to restrict your textual output to predefined patterns, and you'll rarely step out of them. So this is actually, to a certain extent, the shift from internet texting to phone texting, even if it ultimately gets onto the internet, is pretty much the death knell for my technology if a large enough segment of the populace shifts off the internet into the cell phones.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're talking about dumbing down there. We've also got the chemtrails that we've got to consider as well.
I know. It's a terrible situation. I used to think my mother was nuts. She would come to me and tell me in '96, she was saying, they're doing something up there, they're spraying something, and I would say, oh, go away, you're a batty old woman, you're just driving me crazy. And finally I went out one day with this kayak I had made, and I paddled around the local waters, and I was out there between tide changes, so I was out there for 6 hours. And I watched them spray a grid, a pattern, a mat of chemtrails that then floated off to the east. Because of where I'm located in the western edge of the United States, the prevailing winds always blow this stuff to the east. And then I saw them do it all over again, and I was just dumbfounded. And this was in '97. And it is staggering to me that there is not a huge outcry, and there never was. And it's just amazing at how well that was manipulated.
Well, us here in the sovereign movement, it's in fact, I'm just reading the box there in conclusion to what someone was saying. The sovereignty aspect, if you like, is not a movement, it's more of a mindset. So just to clear that up for the member that was asking that question, because I'm not going to put that to Clif. What we are basically trying to do is to detect where these aircraft are coming from, Clif. Try and pin them down to a location, and then deal with it. As yet, we're still having some difficulty with that, but it's definitely something we've got to act on.
I think you need to also stop and look at your strategy. Look at it from a very high level position and drill down. Let me stop and say that I came across the work of Buckminster Fuller, an American fellow who lived in the 20s and 30s, or did most of his major resource work in the 20s and 30s, and who was a very good thinker, and he has this excellent book called Synergetics, and if anybody ever gets through it, it will actually aid you in figuring out how to think about things. And your problem is, with the chemtrails, is the same as everybody's faced here, and that is, okay, so that you find the airplanes, then what? What is your strategy from that point forward?
Well, this is something that we need to be dealing with. There's lots of things, there's lots of problems that we need to deal with, Clif, so, your guess is as good as mine.
Well, I actually think it may be more effective to take a personal approach to something like chemtrails, because we've actually found an air base down here in the West Coast that is reputed to be owned and operated by the CIA, from which all these large planes emerge that appear to be involved in the chemtrail spraying. But no amount of protest or camping around that or anything has in any way altered the chemtrail spraying behavior. But the most effective, I think, strategy that I've seen to date, I've actually seen demonstrated, in which a fellow I was in Chicago, a fellow stood on a Chicago train, pointed out through the train to the chemtrails as they were being sprayed and engaged people in conversation around him on the train about them, including a policeman. Now, he had, for that momentary period of time, I don't know how meaningful it is or how long-lasting, but he had engaged easily 6 people, if not 10 people, in knowledge of chemtrails that they did not possess before. Mm-hmm. So, to a certain extent, I think that maybe a personal approach of, every time you see them, just making it part of your routine basis, that if there's any humans around, you point up in the sky and say, there they go, spraying those chemicals again, in a way that's intended to engage, not frighten individuals. Mm-hmm. But just see if you can't spread it and get more and more individuals aware of this. At some point, we cross a threshold with knowledge. I think it's about 3% of the general populace. I think it would be very difficult for them to maintain the spray levels if what I call the woo-woo community, that is to say those people that are aware of that all the conspiracies of history are in fact true, or that are factual, and that if we had the woo-woo community be 3% of the population, and thus we're discussing these things openly at that level, to say 3% of the population in movie theaters, on buses, trains, etc., we're standing around discussing this kind of stuff in a non-abashed fashion, as though acknowledging the same fact that gasoline engines exist in autos, and chemtrails are above our heads. Okay, what's your problem? Both exist. I can point to both. Get off my case, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. Then they would find it, as the powers that be, they'd find it very difficult not to address it. Mm-hmm. We do see ripples like this in the language cause actual changes in the behavior from the corporate master side.
Sure. Well, it's definitely something needs to be done, Cliff, and that's what, as a globe, as we spoke about earlier, the awakening process is definitely happening. And it's just and I keep saying to people, everybody's alarm clock is set at different times. And it's
there you go, yeah.
Exactly, and it's maybe a good thing that everybody doesn't wake up all at the same time. I wish it was happening just a wee bit quicker, but it seems to be happening.
Universe moves us as it chooses, not as we would desire.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. Yeah. Now, swine flu. Swine flu has been a big one, especially here in the UK. We've had people who have been getting their kids vaccinated without, parental consent, almost. And now here in the UK, as far as I'm aware, what they're doing now is they're mixing the H1N1 vaccination in with the seasonal flu jab, because there was that many people who didn't take the vaccination first time round, basically. I think there's something...
That's an example just of what we were speaking about. Once you get to a certain level of awareness, they must change their patterns of activity, because our behavior pattern changes en masse.
Yeah. So there was something like, I think, 86 million doses of this vaccination sitting in a warehouse or various warehouses that they basically couldn't get rid of. And as I'm saying, they're starting to mix it now with the seasonal flu jab. So for anybody listening, please alert anybody who is of ill health or elderly or diabetes. Cliff, my wife, has got diabetes, and she absolutely refuses to take the seasonal flu jab, and also she refused to take the H1N1 jab. But
yeah, my wife this past year also refused to accept the flu stuff, and it's a major mind change for her, simply because of her relationship to her physician. But I agree with you. As a result of being what we know as a army brat, a child of a military officer here, a lifer, I was subjected to anything the powers that be shoved on that school system, because no one dare object. But so I've had every kind of vaccination that a child could get in the particular time I was in their tender mercies. Uh-huh. But I would refuse to get vaccines, and you can actually demonstrate that the whole concept of the vaccines, from polio onward, is is not as it's been portrayed. The polio vaccine came upon the planet and is used primarily to prop up the whole nature of the idea of vaccinations as a good thing. Mm-hmm. And yet the polio vaccine was introduced into the population as the polio disease was waning, and so if you'd introduced pure water in the vaccine, you would have still, instead of the vaccine, you still would have had the same level of drop of the polio disease, and thus they could have claimed that pure water vaccines cure everything, had they desired to do so. My point being that vaccines and vaccinations as a process is flawed.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of the swine flu jab itself, Clif, what is your understanding of the populace's mindset when it comes to receiving that in America? Is it for, against, what's happening?
I was actually shocked to see how the population reacted here in the United States, because the swine flu vaccine pretty much failed here. There were a number of mainstream press, mainstream media propaganda episodes and events that they staged to try and get mass acceptance of the vaccine, but they dumped hundreds of millions of doses that they just were not able to get out into the people. So there was a level of awareness that crept through. But we'd also had the issue here in the United States of the vaccine in the 70s, and there were enough of us alive from that period that remembered the results of it that could pass that on, that we had that anecdotal tradition of, oh no, stay away from any swine flu vaccine. Last time it caused, so-and-so to become paralyzed.
Mm-hmm. Was there not a study or a research or something done that basically told us that you cannot combine a bird flu, a pig flu, and a human flu all in the one? It just can't happen.
Well, and actually the idea that you can contain a human flu from a vaccine is flawed as well. We note that if that were the case, why do we have a consistent level of flu disease appear constantly? It has nothing to, it doesn't vary relative to the amount of vaccine that's going on. So the vaccine in no way alters the progression patterns of the disease over time. And the thing, too, about the swine component is the nature of our DNA relative to the pig DNA. There's enough of a similarity in base sets that you, to a certain extent, you're vaccinating against stuff that your own body would produce naturally. That is to say, the swine flu vaccine, because it's going after the swine protein, will also target some of your own proteins. Mm-hmm. It's not that smart.
Just in fact, I read an article in one of the mainstream newspapers. I don't often read them, but I was sitting in a place the other day with my car, and I was reading the papers that they leave lying about in these places, and it told us that there has been a reaction to the swine flu jab itself, that there's a certain amount of people has been have developed the condition narcolepsy. So people are just falling asleep. And they're telling
they want to dumb you down and keep you out of things. Yeah, I guess that's at an extreme level, but
that's the ultimate sleep, is putting you asleep.
Yeah.
Making you fall asleep. It's absolutely crazy.
It's really strange, though, when you examine some of these things from a slightly different viewpoint of universe. And that I keep coming back to this idea of continuous creation and destruction. If you envision the universe, whether or not you believed it or accepted it as immaterial, but if you just for a minute use this idea of the universe modeled as nothing more than a gigantic, never-ending pool of energy crashing in on itself, causing all of these ripples and interference patterns and so on, which our brains, consciousness, interpret as material reality, then you can start looking at some things like vaccine, and you say, at one level it makes no sense at all, and then at this other level, look what it does to promote the following. And then that starts straying